Hi, everyone. I'm between you and the startup contest, so I will be quick. It's not working? There we go. So a little bit about myself. I've been working in London as a part of the tech ecosystem actually since 2000. So I've actually seen a boom and bust cycle once in 2000, and now I've actually seen the resurgence of London. So I wanted to sort of put forward a theory around building a really sustainable tech ecosystem based on what I've seen in the last decade in London. One of the comments I'd make is I'm actually sitting on a few advisory boards, including Startup Europe. So I've had a chance to, it's run by the European Commission. So I've had a chance to test this theory with about 8 different countries around Europe, and it seems to make sense. So very quickly, to put it all in context, I'm showing this site because it's really talking about the various tech ecosystems in Europe and what are some of the lessons that can be learned there. And one of the really interesting bits of data is there's something like 640,000 companies across Europe right now that are focusing on tech and digital. And then if you push it forward, looking at the various cities, you can see London has almost 280,000 companies based there. And Berlin sort of second, and Munich and Stockholm, doing very well as well. So really, this is showing the London story in context of really being really, really far ahead. So this is what I would call the recipe book for an innovation ecosystem. There's a lot of stuff going on there, and what I wanted to do is really talk about the story from 2008 to present in the context of these various bubbles, as I like to say. So the London story, I like to call about it in 4 phases, from 2008 to 10, 10 to 12, 12 to 14, and what's happening today. And it's the age of the British unicorn, a very much overused word, but I'll use the word Eurocorn because there's quite a few popping up as we speak. So 2008 to 2010, what we see, and I'd really like to get your feedback afterwards around what you're seeing happening around Turkey. I've been talking to a fair number of you throughout the conference, but really what we're seeing first of all happening is we've got a lot of movement from the community and grassroots. We've got universities and students and university incubators actually coming into play, and of course the entrepreneur. And a couple of war stories. There's this tech cluster in London called Silicon Roundabout, and that's basically a part of East London. If you go further east, that's where the Olympics were built. The London 2012 Olympics were hosted there. And tech startups and entrepreneurs and founders started to move there because the property was cheap. And they just started to what we would call colonize an area of London. Universities have always been around, some of the top tech universities in Europe based around London. And then in terms of the community and outreach, it was a very special period of time in around 2007, 2008, when TechCrunch actually launched in Europe, based out of London. And there was a lot of really interesting developer meetups and warehouses and, sort of cheap property areas in East London. Then if you look at some of the things like the investors and corporates that were getting involved at the time, investors, there's always the established funds that have been around, so the big European VC funds that you've heard about, always investing quietly, et cetera, et cetera. But then this is right when a really interesting seed fund, Seedcamp, was launched in early 2007. And it still continues to be one of the most established seed funds in Europe. But actually, this was a really interesting point in time where a partner at Index, Saul Klein, saw that there was a need for a seed fund and to really start financing the early stage. At the same time, corporates were getting involved. So I know Amazon was here the last couple of days. So AWS had always been working with startups since 2006. I was there in London in 2008 launching what then was known as the BizSpark, or the startup program for Microsoft. And that was really about giving software and product sets to the companies. And that's now actually become Microsoft Ventures today. Ditto with IBM. So you're seeing a lot of the platform companies making a play for this space, because really it's about getting earlier stage companies to work. There's very little going on with incubators and accelerators. Government just continues to do their thing. And the advisors haven't come on board quite yet. 2010 to 12, you start to see more activity. What I would call out here is some of the British or European unicorns are founded. So I would call out TransferWise, which many of you may know about. But TransferWise was a Seedcamp company in 2011. Investors, we still have the very big VCs, as you would expect, but actually more early stage funds and incubators are starting to launch, and you can sort of see some of the names there. In terms of corporates, we're starting to see Google. So Google, for example, opened up their campus, the very first campus globally in London, and that was literally a 7-story building of which 4 stories were hosting companies, and it was really what they called their gift to the startup ecosystem. And they do thousands and thousands of events there to this day. Telefonica, very, very large telephony and mobile operator. They launched Wyra, which is a big facility, and it's around 14 facilities around the world. And it's a way for them to engage with innovation. Community, there's a really great group called the Three Beards, and what they're starting to do is build community-based events in London, doing events on Friday nights where more and more developers and founders are starting to meet up. And again, the universities continue to get involved. But what you're seeing, and I will call out the government and policy, now this is where the government really starts to take shape and get involved in the ecosystem. So this is where they launched something called Tech City UK. And what's really interesting about Tech City UK is they're really focused on working with entrepreneurs, investors, and building policy that's actually going to help the companies in this ecosystem. And so some parts of policy that I would call out would be the entrepreneur visa. So if you founded a company and you're getting funded, it would be easy for you to get a visa to work in the United Kingdom. So they're starting to do things around that, things around tax and regulation, but there's a real focus from number 10 Downing Street and the special advisors. And really that, combined with a lot of that, is really starting to see the ecosystem take off. I won't bother reading this whole slide, but what I wanted to do with this slide, making it deliberately busy, is to show you that 2013 and 14 has just been an incredible period of hypergrowth. You're seeing more and more corporates getting involved, corporates that you wouldn't think get involved in innovation. So John Lewis, which is one of UK's largest retailers, they launched an incubator because they realized that retail technology is very important. Community, they've started to launch something called the London Technology Week with the Mayor of London's office. And you're talking 15,000 events in London over the period of a week, all arranged by the grassroots and community, but with the collaboration and support of the Mayor's office. Universities and students, we're seeing more and more incubators launching. We're seeing more angel clubs coming out, or angel networks coming out of universities. Advisors are starting to pile in, so we see a lot of law firms and lawyers, etc. And then the final thing I'll say sort of around the investor side is the established VCs are starting to raise their further on funds, but this is the era of what I would call the emerging VC. So a lot of brand new venture capital funds, 30 million and above, the average would be probably about, it ranged between 30 and 150 million. You're seeing a lot of these really interesting emerging VCs launch, but who they are is they tend to be principals or associates from the established VCs and realizing there's a lot of money and a funding gap between around 250,000 and 2 million in funding, whereas the established VCs are starting to, focus on the bigger rounds. And I think there's probably around 10 launching this year in the UK alone. So you're starting to see some really good ones. And these guys are actually getting in much earlier on what we would call, some of the really big up-and-coming companies. And then the government and policy, again, the British government was just re-elected earlier this year, and they continue to maintain a massive focus on technology and innovation, and now they're looking at different entrepreneur visas. It's more like a scale-up focused visa, and what that means is it's not just bringing in the founder and the founding team in, it's actually the next layer team who, if you look at the stories of Brendan and Dalton, it's about executing and scaling that company to the next level. So it's the CMO, the CTO, the sort of the tier 2 staff who are really going to take that company to the next level. It's that kind of visa that the government is now focusing on. And then policy-wise, you're looking at tax regimes such as what they call SEIS. And really what that is money focused around a tax relief by angels. So what that is doing is really bringing a lot of money from high net worth individuals and putting money into a company with a really significant form of tax relief. So again, it's just hugely busy. And I would call this era of the Britcorn, again, sort of plagiarizing the unicorn word, but you're starting to see organizations like Tech City, which is now firmly established, saying, well, these are our future 50 companies that we think will exit big. The London Stock Exchange launches a program called Elite, and they're identifying companies and really actively promoting companies to float and exit on the stock exchange. Of course, exits continue to happen to corporates, but this is really about, trying to build that marketplace. So if you look at today, this article was published in the FT on October 6th, so just earlier this month. And this is saying, look at this. So over from 2008 to 2015, this is a huge opportunity for the UK to be a technology leader. And continued press. Boring you a tiny bit with numbers, CB Insights is really pulling some interesting data together on a global basis. And what you can see is on the far right-hand side of the deck, far left-hand side, my bad, you can see that actually the biggest amount of funding has been happening in 2015. London has actually become a world-class ecosystem and a world-class center because I believe all those bubbles are working together in tandem. It's all really happening. In terms of Hub for Tech, borrowing some statistics from the Mayor of London's office, what we can see is a massive direct economic impact into the sector. Computer science students, data scientists, it's all starting to really bubble away in London. Incubators and accelerators, there's probably around 40 in London and the UK alone, and you can just see it popping up. And I'd really be interested to see where Istanbul and the rest of Turkey is at from this incubator and accelerator space, because it's incredible. Every other month you're seeing something pop up. And here's just a sampling of some of the companies that Tech City UK and the London Stock Exchange have identified as the future leaders and the future exits in Great Britain. They have put Box up there, probably for the Box UK, but really these are the ones that they believe will be the next big thing in terms of company. Hottest sectors, I think this is very important. The one I would really call out is Fintech. London really has become a hub for Fintech, mainly because a lot of the largest investment banks and European banks have headquartered in London, and I think we haven't even seen the half of it yet. Other sectors I would call out, retail technology. So much retail and e-commerce happening in the UK, probably one of the world's largest, most concentrated markets. And so you're seeing a lot of retail technology. Cybertech, we actually, back with my old Silicon Valley Bank hat on, we pulled together a cybertech event where there was something like 13 cybertech companies and almost 100 investors in a room from all around the globe, and mainly corporate, saying cybersecurity is hot and London is really where it begins. This was just published yesterday by a really good European blog called tech.eu, and you can see that London has become, not only a place for startups, but it's actually the place for scale-ups. And I think in terms of comparison with US-based cities, you can't compare it to Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is 30 plus years ahead, but London and New York are quite similar. So this kind of story is actually fairly parallel to what we've been seeing happen in the New York ecosystem. So really worth looking at that as well. So very quickly, in conclusion, I think the London story gives a good example of how technology and innovation and all of these people working really well together in conjunction can create a really, really solid ecosystem. So I want to leave you with the question, where are you at in Istanbul? To me it feels like you've got a really strong community in grassroots with Arda and Webrazzi and other events that are happening. I see that there are strong universities and students, and I do see a strong amount of entrepreneurs with global investors taking a look. So I'd really be interested to see where you'll be in 3 to 5 years' time if this kind of pace of growth continues. So that's a question I'll leave with all of you. And if you have questions, please do feel free to come ask. Thank you very much.